ko te mata te maunga, ko tuki tuki te awa, no hiratanga aho, ko Brown, tōku whānau, ko Emma, tōku ingoa. Tēnā koutou, kia ora rā tātou katoa. I am from Aotearoa, New Zealand, which, as you can see, is a small island nation located in the Pacific Ocean. Of course, you cannot see it on this map, as we've been left off. This is a very real thing that happens to us a lot. We have several campaigns going on to make sure we're not left off maps. So that's better. All the way down the bottom of the world is New Zealand. I acknowledge and thank my fellow speakers, as I did see New Zealand on your maps. New Zealanders are named Kiwis after our national bird. A couple of fun facts about Kiwis. These little birds have enormous eggs, with one of the largest egg-to-body weight ratios in the world. And a Kiwi's nostrils are at the end of its beak, which means technically they have the shortest beak because beak measurements are taken from the position of the nostrils. While we might be at the bottom of the world, and sometimes even left off the map, we do not forget about the rest of the world. We take a global view. New Zealand was the first country in the world to give women the right to vote. You may have seen our beautiful country in the Lord of the Rings movies, directed by fellow Kiwi Peter Jackson. Sports fans will know us for our national rugby team, the All Blacks. Noting the results of this week, we're still won the Rugby World Cup more times than any other team. Our Sauvignon Blanc put us on the map as a wine-producing country and a leader in this style. And we continue to be a world leader in exports of premium fruits, including apples and kiwi fruit. Both of these global brands, Jazz and Zespri, originated in New Zealand and are underpinned by Varieties bred by Plant and Food Research. This morning I would like to take you on a journey through the evolution of our UPOV Convention with respect to essentially derived varieties and the corresponding breeding strategies in fruits. In the 1978 Act of the UPOV Convention, there was no EDV concept. Within the next 13 years, we moved as a convention to the 1991 Act with the first introduction of the broad EDV concept. In 2009, the first explanatory notes on EDVs was adopted and immediately opened for revision. Then in 2017, and 26 years later, the second explanatory notes on EDVs under the UPOV 91 Convention was adopted. Let's focus for a moment on UPOV 78. As noted in the 78 Act of the UPOV Convention, there was no EDV concept. This, of course, remains a live and active document for those countries still ratified with UPOV 78, including New Zealand, where our legislation has no EDV concept or provision, one area where we are definitely not leading the world. The breeding strategies employed at the time UPOV 78 was adopted largely consisted of conventional crossing, including deliberate outcrossing and planned back-crossing strategies, with long periods of evaluation, of which you can see some examples listed here. For some fruit species, naturally occurring mutations are common, such as apples, which are commonly referred to as sports. The apple variety Kids D8, marketed as Gala, was bred through conventional crossing in New Zealand. Gala fruit are well known to consumers around the world. Since its release in the 1970s, there has been a proliferation of sports. There is a degree of technical difficulty in identifying a sport with potentially beneficial characteristics, propagating and confirming uniformity and stability. Given this proliferation, I ask you to consider the inevitable consumer confusion and cannibalization of the market from the initial variety. which I suggest will have been exacerbated by the allowance of the use of the marketing name Gala in a wide range of denominations and marketing names. As you can see with this simplistic representation, the high degree of genetic conformity to the initial variety is inherent when varieties are developed in this way. I would also like to draw your attention to the distinct characteristics of these EDVs of KIDS D8. They are largely high fruit colour mutants or with seasonal variations. Many of these would of course fit the definition of an EDV as a copycat. However, please note the variety marketed as Blondie, which is a yellow colour mutant. As Yolanda noted earlier, colour of the fruit in apples is an important characteristic. So is this still an EDV? Arising as it has as a sport, which by definition must have a high degree of genetic conformity, it must be, but it is certainly not a copycat. Within the next 13 years, we moved as a convention to the 1991 Act, with the first introduction of the broad EDV concept. This came with an immediate requirement to start the discussion on the details of the EDV concept. However, this did not commence until 2007. Conventional crossing was still the dominant breeding strategy employed in fruit species at this time, with naturally occurring mutations varying in commonality by species. We now also need to consider new breeding strategies and new breeding techniques in fruit breeding strategies, though to quote Plant and Food Research CEO David Hughes, in the late 1990s, public scepticism cast genetic modification as the answer to the question no one was asking. Let us now look at naturally occurring mutations in this era. Increasingly, we are seeing commercialisation models that bundle intellectual property. A high-profile and highly successful example of this is the Pink Lady program, where the apple variety Crips Pink is marketed as Pink Lady. The intellectual property bundled in this commercialisation model includes a registered trademark and bylines, a brand strategy, and grower support. Since its release, naturally occurring mutations of Crips Pink have been discovered and developed. These new varieties have been selected for improved characteristics, such as better fruit colour and higher disease resistance, but most fundamentally for the owner of the brand Apel, fruit are not marketed as Pink Lady unless they meet the consumer eating experience. Through this assurance that regardless of the variety, the fruit meets the Pink Lady brand promise, there is no consumer confusion, a very different scenario to what we saw with Gala. However, with the seemingly subjective nature of the definition of EDVs and the variation in national legislation, there is confusion between breeders of initial varieties and EDVs. Such confusion can lead to disputes. Cases that illustrate this, which have come to public attention, include those around Crips Pink, apple, and Nardcot and Tango mandarins. Conversely, with the increasing use of techniques such as tissue culture, propagation, which has been widely used in some industries for decades, with scientific advances as being used in a broader range of fruit crop species, we, with our commercialisation partners, work with strategies to ensure that mutations are not introduced. For example, in raspberry propagation, we, with our partners, are careful to ensure that a common somoclonal mutation is not introduced through suboptimal tissue culture techniques to ensure trueness to type, as this mutation has significant implications in fruit quality. We've seen this example a couple of times already this morning. I'll go into a little more detail. 2017 saw the first commercial crop of Arctic Golden harvested in USA. This has been followed by Arctic Granny and Arctic Fuji, with Arctic Gala in development. These are the first genetically modified fruits to be brought to the market with a consumer-focused trait. These varieties have all been modified in the same way to essentially turn off the process that causes apples to go brown when cut or bruised. These varieties have a strong consumer-facing brand built around the Arctic umbrella trademark. and the use of key elements of the original variety denomination or marketing name. And the modified trait has consumer appeal with brand messaging around sustainability and lessening food waste. Regardless of your personal views on the controversial topic of genetic modification or the value of a non-browning apple, the question I suggest we need to consider is why were these initial varieties selected by Okanagan Specialty Fruits? They explain why on their website. We took 3 of North America's top varieties and improved them with the non-browning trait. They've taken 3, and soon to be 4, very familiar apple varieties, well established with consumers, leveraging on that familiarity and establishment with a single difference. With the potential controversy surrounding a genetically modified fruit, selecting varieties which already have an established consumer following is a well-considered choice. And the marketing around the fruits being essentially everything you love about these varieties, but better with this one difference, makes it a potentially easier leap for some consumers into genetic modification. As Anthony noted earlier, Okanagan Specialty Fruits have made a considered choice in selecting varieties well outside any proprietary position and PVR protection, and the potential controversy of taking another party's proprietary variety and making one change. In 2009, the first explanatory notes on EDVs was adopted and almost immediately opened for revision. Then in 2017, the second explanatory notes on EDVs were adopted. It is critical that we do not underestimate the important influence that the explanatory note can and does have. We've seen this already again this morning. This is, of course, Article 14, 5B of the 91 Convention, giving the broad definition to EDVs, which I know you're all very familiar with. For all of our member countries, the opportunity to review, amend, or adopt new legislation is a very rare one. And while many of the representatives here today are those that implement their national law, it is most often a policy team that authors it. When any country does have the opportunity to implement new legislation, it does not do this in isolation. We look at the explanatory notes, that being their purpose, and we also look to the national laws of other member countries to see how the Convention has been given effect. My own country is now in the process of legislative review. As I noted earlier, New Zealand is still currently ratified with UPOV 78. We're at the point in the process where our accountable government body has prepared an options paper for public review and submission. It is worth noting again the respect and influence of UPOV in the explanatory notes, as the copycat model, which is perceived as endorsed by UPOV through following of the guidance in the explanatory note, was proposed as the preferred option. The option that was put forward focused on the difference and the significance of the difference between an EDV and the initial variety, rather than the genetic similarity. So where will we go next? Today's the day we have the opportunity to decide. Accepting that within the regulatory environment of many countries there is a low or no acceptance of genetic modification, the science and public perception is moving forward. The rate of change in the science and the rate of positive change in public perception are observed to be accelerating. So the EDV concept that created such a step change from 1978 to 1991 will be tested even more in the next 10, 20 and 50 plus years, and deserves to be revisited to ensure it is balancing the scope of new breeding techniques and traditional breeding. Many breeding companies are advancing swiftly towards a future where their overarching breeding strategies are not fixed within one methodology, but may employ a combination. It is essential that users of our PVR regime have clarity, transparency, and certainty regardless of the breeding strategies they employ. Our system relies heavily on integrity, and confusion amongst breeders benefits no one, least of all consumers. Due to the various methods of implementation, even within the legislation of countries ratified with UPOV 91, there is a very real possibility that a candidate variety would be considered an EDV in some countries and not in others. Who does this benefit? A protectable EDV must be clearly distinguishable from the initial variety. The requirement for distinctness is fundamental to our PVR system and draws the line between an EDV and a variety which is not clearly distinguishable from the protectable variety. As a discrete variety, an EDV is in principle eligible for PVR protection. If it is not clearly distinguishable from the initial and other varieties of common knowledge, then it cannot receive separate PVR protection but falls automatically within the scope of the earlier protected variety. The prevention of plagiarism or copycat breeding is a question of distinctness, and if a new variety is not clearly distinguishable from the protected variety, then its commercialisation is a direct infringement. The fact that an EDV needs to be distinct from its initial variety clearly means that a copycat can never enjoy PVR protection in its own right, as a copycat already lacks distinctness. It also begs the question of enforcement. How can the owner of a variety with PVR protection hope to enjoy and enforce their rights for the limited period in time in which they have them, if equivalent rights are granted to varieties which can hardly be differentiated from the pre-existing variety? Member countries look to UPOV to guide them and provide the bedrock to their respective national laws. New fruit varieties have lead times of decades. The results of breeding programs being undertaken today are 10 to 20 years away from reaching consumers, but we need clarity now on how the international law on which we rely on to protect our innovation will be implemented. We are also at a crossroads for new breeding techniques, with rapid development of new and undetectable techniques and shifting public perception, potentially with greater market acceptance of fruits arising from multidisciplinary breeding programs. Breeders around the world want to be able to deliver new and innovative varieties, delivering for the benefit of society, and to receive a fair share of benefit on those innovations. To best enable breeders to continue to deliver innovation, we request certainty from UPOV and the rights granted, regardless of the breeding strategies employed. Given the influence the explanatory note can and does have, we respectfully request that the explanatory note is reconsidered, taking into account the information and presentations you have received here today. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. I'm not going to let you leave right away. At the very beginning of your presentation, you shared a beautiful Maori greeting and introduction. Maybe I saw some eyes wide and wasn't sure. Would you mind giving us an English translation of that?
My apologies. It is a pepeha and a mihi. It tells you where I'm from, what is important to me, and as a greeting to all. So in English it translates loosely to greetings all, Tamata is the mountain, Tuki Tuki is the stream, I am from Hastings, Brown is my family, and my name is Emma. Greetings and warm welcome to all.